Hi everyone, welcome to our second teach-in on expanding midwifery access in New York. We forgot to press record until we were slightly through our introductions, but I'm Katie and Nubia Martin we've both introduced ourselves on the past teach-in, and we'll skip right ahead to our next board members because I'm sure you'll learn more about us in time. Does someone want to go next from the board?
Sure. I'm Melissa Carman. Everyone kind of calls me Missy, and I'm a CPM and went to Birthwise Midwifery School and then to MCU and got my bachelor's of science in midwifery. I am one of the midwives who's been arrested in the state of New York, so I'm facing 2 felonies and 2 misdemeanors. Yay, Monique right below me is like, I love that face. So I'm in this for a big fight. And I'm willing to, if it means go to jail for the rights of childbearing families, and that's where I'm supposed to be. I've been very, very active with NYCPM as an original board member, and I continue on the board, and also just out there doing the legislative work, making the contacts, and getting co-sponsors on this bill, and along with a team of other people. And it's like a passion. I love this lobbying work, and bringing attention to the huge maternity care problem and crisis that we have in this state. So
I'm Sue Derby, and I'm a CPM. I've been attending births for almost 40 years in New York, not legally. Usually I try to work with a licensed midwife, but that hasn't always worked out. So it's been a passion of mine for a long time to be licensed, because I've always worried, like what's happening to Melissa, that I'll be charged. And I was investigated a couple of times, but it was a friendlier situation then. First time it was before there was even licensing. So at that point, midwifery was under the Department of Health, and it was a misdemeanor. So now it's a felony. So once our 3 beloved midwives got arrested, I got certainly more involved recently, and would truly love to see CPMs get licensed. It's about time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Susan. I think Sandra's the last board member on, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, greetings everyone. My name is Sanjo Omoyekari. I was born and raised between the Bronx and Yonkers, New York. I'm currently a student midwife at Midwife's College of Utah, pursuing my bachelor's degree in midwifery. Because of my studies, because of school, I have transversed and uplifted my whole family from New York to Utah to do my experience when it comes to midwifery. And goal for me is to eventually come back home and be reunited with my family and friends and serve the people that I would like to serve within my community. I'm currently a board member for NYCPM, and yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sandra. And for all of the board for being here tonight, and for all the hard work that you have been doing around the issue of midwifery access in New York. And so several things got mentioned in the introductions about folks getting arrested for practicing midwifery, about people having to leave the state to learn midwifery. And so I'm wondering if one of the board members can essentially break down for us a lot of what we covered in the first teach-in, and kind of go over like what are some of the core issues and challenges that have made, that have made people need to leave the state, or have that made parts of midwifery illegal in New York, and how what is this bill that you've been working on, and how does it address those challenges?
Yeah. I'd be happy to give just a little background on some of the things that we talked about in intro. There's one more person in the chat who introduced themselves, Malika. She says, hi, it's Malika. I'm a midwife. I live in Flatbush and work in the Bronx and Manhattan. Very interested in staying informed and abreast of all that is happening with expanding access to midwifery in New York. She's also cooking, also has a loud dog in the background. Sorry. So, yeah, so I guess just to kind of give a little background for anybody who is like completely new to this, specifically pertaining to New York, there are currently 2 pathways that are legally recognized for practicing midwifery here. That is the certified nurse midwife or the certified midwife. And both of those require a master's degree in midwifery. As somebody who has a master's degree in midwifery, but knew that I wanted to work in more community midwifery setting, more of a holistic practitioner, and definitely an out-of-hospital setting, I will say that that education pathway did not prepare for out-of-hospital birth. It was very medical industrial complex based, and that meant that when I finished my program, I needed to do additional, working with home birth midwives and just kind of really immersing myself in my community and doing a lot of call and response. So because those are the only 2 pathways recognized, the certified professional midwife, which is what this bill is specifically about, is the credential that we are working to get legally recognized here in New York. And the reason why, well, there are many reasons why this is important, and we talked about a few of them, and I'm sure we'll dive a little bit deeper, is that this particular training is specific to out-of-hospital birth. And when we look at evidence-based research, the safest place for somebody who's having a healthy low-risk pregnancy to give birth and not just survive, but also thrive and have a positive experience is out of hospital. So we know that we're in the midst of a maternal health crisis, where our numbers are not great for anybody, but specifically for Black women and women of color. We have huge disparities across the country where Black women are dying 3 to 4 times more than their white counterparts. But here in New York, 8 to 12 times more. So I don't think it's a far reach to understand that because we're one of the few states that does not recognize this credential, that's where there is that huge disparity. We're not allowing midwives who are knowledgeable, skilled, and want to serve their communities, who have had to, as Sandra said, leave their home to go sometimes across the country to get an education that they might not be able to bring back those skills to their community. That's essentially, in a nutshell, what this bill will allow the legal, access and ability to do that. So I'll stop there, and then I'll let anybody else jump in with just more background of what we covered before and kind of an update of where we are and what's changed since the last teach-in.
So one of the, besides that educational component at one time, and some people might say, well, wait a second, there are some CPMs here in New York State that have their license. So how did they get their license, but the CPMs now can't get their license? But between 1992 and 2010, we were under the Midwifery Practice Act, and that allowed a pathway for CPMs to challenge the equivalency educational portion of the statute. So CPMs could say, hey, Department of Education, we want to take that AMCB exam. And that's the exam that's given to the CNMs and CMs. And if they pass that exam, they could become LMs. So great. So there are some CPMs who actually have their license already, and they've maintained that license. But then in 2010, when the Midwives Modernization Act went into effect, it closed that loophole, and they added the master's degree portion to the rules and regulations. They didn't change the statute, but they changed that in the rules and regs. And they no longer allowed CPMs to challenge the educational equivalency portion. So then that left, there was people like literally coming in right under the last possible minute. I think there was a midwife who now lives in Canada, who was one of the last people to get her license as a CPM. And so in that Midwives Modernization Act did away with the written practice agreement. And before that, that written practice agreement was in effect. And that put physicians over midwives. And the only way a midwife could practice in the community setting or home or a birth center was to have a physician sign off and say it's perfectly okay for that midwife to practice, which that doesn't work. Physicians weren't doing it. Some physicians might agree, but they're way one side of the state compared to where the midwife is. So that was a huge thing. And so now with this bill, and we're going to be talking about some of the stuff that's going on right now with SED, which is the State Education Department. What we're hoping is to finally bring real exposure to CPMs, not through the back door, but actual upfront, like these are the people who serve their communities. These are people who are culturally enriched and are people who are serving their own people. For example, we have CPMs that are Mennonites. They serve Mennonites. There are many Black and brown women who are calling to have midwives that are Black and brown, and we don't have enough. And we don't have any educational pathways right now, because if you live in the state of New York and you want to go to school to become a CPM, even if you're never going to live in New York, maybe you'll live in Texas or another state that allows licensure, you cannot be a resident of the state of New York and attend a school to become a CPM unless you've got an aunt who happens to have an address outside this state. And that's because there's no pathway for licensure for CPMs. So it closes off that opportunity. And that's a more affordable education. And it is more based in tradition and culture that brings back what we've lost over generations, and gets away from this medical model of intervention and chaos. So yeah, I hope that's helpful info.
Yeah, I think that did a great job of breaking down some of like the history of how we got here. And just to help us clarify, at any point in time, was there a good reason for the birthing people of New York to have closed this pathway to CPMs? It's a trick question.
Yeah,
and we know that there's no reason why it would be, there's no advantage to New Yorkers of having closed this pathway, because there's 37 other states where CPMs are practicing safely and without issue.
Right.
And also during the pandemic, when there was such a shortage of care providers, Governor Cuomo issued an executive order saying that if you were licensed to practice anywhere, you could practice in New York while we were in a state of emergency. And so for most of the past 2 years, CPMs from other states have been able to catch babies in New York, and there, again, have not been any issues, no safety concerns, no, oh my God, our statistics crumbled. Only positive things have happened since they were temporarily allowed to practice under the emergency order. And so we only have reason to believe that more good things would continue to happen should we make that a permanent through this law that New York CPM has been working on for a while. So I guess just real quickly, seeing as we know the problem, can someone address like just what this bill is, what it does, and why we want to get it past this legislative session.
Do you want me to take that or nobody else?
I mean, I guess we can both talk about it. I just wanted to add on to what, Katie just said about the executive order and, the implication behind stating that, COVID was a pandemic and it's a crisis and we need people to come in and we need all hands on deck, and recognizing that these CPMs, who are legally able to practice in other states, yes, you have the skills, come in, help us, but then not realizing that the maternal mortality morbidity rate disparities that we've had for many, many years that are not getting any better, that is a crisis in and of itself. So to say that one thing is a crisis and the other isn't, it really kind of makes me question, the value of Black mothers and women of color. And that's one of the things that we're really, pushing in this bill. So I guess I can give just a little bit of, what the bill is going to allow for, and then we'll talk about some of the updates to the bill. So basically, it would allow for, simply stated, that those who are pursuing the CPM credential and have that credential would be able to legally practice here in New York. It would also allow for people to not have to leave the state of New York to get educated, in this pathway. And one of the things that we've really been trying to preserve in this bill is multiple pathways in learning and education, not just, just book knowledge, but also recognizing apprenticeship and that level of skill, because that is something that is more traditional and people learn in different ways, and not everybody just learns from a book. Like having actual practical hands-on experience working with more, senior midwives or more advanced midwives, but also exposure to working and practicing and getting experience in the setting that you want to be able to provide care in. So, all of my clinical experience while I was in school was within a hospital. And I was like, okay, well, that's, great, but this is not where I plan on working. And there was not a pathway for me to have any exposure to home birth. So those were all things I had to do post-graduation. So this would open up that, pathway as well for people. And ultimately, this bill will allow for just more access to midwives, and especially in places where care is really scarce, right? Where it might be, 3 or 4 hours to get to a hospital, even if somebody wanted to go to a hospital. What this bill ultimately allows is centering the needs of birthing families. So if they do not want to go to a hospital, if they want to have a midwife care for them, they don't have to, travel outside of their state. They don't have to, go far distances. They have people in their community who understand their cultural backgrounds, who they respect, who they actually want to care for them. And it's not, it's not like looking for a needle in a haystack. When I was having my first home birth, I had to go out of state to find a midwife, to care for me. And I was willing to do that because it was so important to me, but not everybody has that ability. So I'll leave it there, and then I'll let Missy or Sue get a little bit more into, the particulars, I guess, of the bill. Or go ahead, Katie.
I guess I'll just pause there for questions from the audience of like, we just did a lot of information. If you didn't know there were 3 pathways to midwifery in America, then that was a lot of information quickly. So any questions, clarifications, things you want us to elaborate on, and then yes, we'll go throw back to Sue and Melissa to talk about more bill details and updates since the last week. Monique, go ahead.
Okay. It I don't know if it's the same thing, but I wanted Charlene to touch on this, so I hope she's listening. I hope I say it correctly.
I'm here.
Okay, Charlene, I want to bring up the point about what was going on with the signing of the paperwork. Is there a reason a doctor wouldn't sign paperwork so you could utilize a doula? If I'm saying it, Charlene, please correct me.
Okay, so the situation that Monique is she's talking about, my daughter is expecting her first child and she wants to have a home birth. So she her insurance covers, I believe, is Oxford. The midwife that she had is out of her I think they call the network. So she had to ask her doctor to basically sign she had to ask her doctor to sign to show that she's been treated for up into 25 weeks, I believe. The doctor, my daughter's doctor, is refusing to sign the document so that my daughter could give birth with the midwife. And it's so complicated.
Yep.
And I really don't understand exactly what's going on, but I mean, my common sense would say she's not going to sign it because she wants to keep the money for herself and really doesn't care about her patient's desires or wants. So I'm sitting here now listening to everyone, and it's like, my God, it's this is all new to me. I want to just say, and I'm learning so much just in this short period of time, and I just want to thank everybody. And if anybody have any answers or any information that they can share with me and my family, we would greatly appreciate it.
Sure. I'll speak a little bit to that, because this is the insurance issue. And this is for currently licensed LMs in the state of New York. It is often extremely difficult for them to become approved providers, to bill insurance. So many midwives set up hey, you have to pay up front, and then we'll give you the stuff that you need to submit so you can get reimbursed from the insurance company. Because what would happen was some of these midwives would submit to the insurance companies, they wouldn't get paid for a year or better, or they'd get reimbursed at a much, much lower rate. It is absolutely mind-blowing to me that insurance companies would deliberately choose to pay a higher rate to the hospital, even for a vaginal delivery and for a cesarean, which we know throughout this state is anywhere between probably 28% up to 45 to 49% cesarean rate. They'd rather pay that than to pay a home birth midwife who is licensed in the state of New York. And this is a big problem that the legislators really need to focus on. And the problem is that the people at the top rung are your insurance companies, the pharmaceutical companies, and the medical establishment. And they don't want you to have choice. But the thing is every single birthing person in the state of New York has the right to choose their birth attendant. And if you've made an informed choice about that, and in this particular case, I'm assuming, Charlene, that your daughter has chosen a licensed midwife, then the doctor should have absolutely no say whatsoever. And the argument should be made with the insurance company directly that they should cover that. And there is I don't know if I can find it. It's been a long time since I've seen it. There is a document that shows that even if the hospital cannot provide the service that your daughter desires, which is a home birth, then by law in the state of New York, they have to cover home birth and out of network. So I'll have to dig around to try to find that document for you, but that's a law.
That is accurate, yes.
Oh my God, thank you.
But I do know that there are some insurances, and I honestly cannot remember if it's Oxford right now, that if, like, for example, if somebody had, I don't know, a prior C-section, right? That sometimes those insurances do require like a doctor's note in order for the insurance to cover it. However, we know that even if somebody has not had a prior, you know, issue, sometimes insurance at best still will give you the runaround. So in those cases, you can opt to, you know, retain the services of a midwife without insurance. Of course, there's going to be financial barriers there, but my nonprofit organization does have an access to home birth fund that helps to offset some of the out-of-pocket expenses when insurance either will not cover it or will undercover it or what have you. So that's something that we can definitely, you know, talk about, because yes, as Missy was saying, you know, the people who are making the decisions about our bodies and our births, you know, it's a profitable business, right? The medical industrial complex is about making money. And what we are trying to do with this bill, and what most all birth workers are trying to do, is actually change that, you know, hierarchy and make it a circle where we are censoring the needs of birthing families. So that means where there's a will, there's a way. So if somebody, you know, is having a healthy pregnancy, has found a birth team that they want to support them, and their insurance is giving them, you know, a barrier, there is, you know, there are ways and routes around that. And this bill will allow for us to have more providers, more midwives who are completely dedicated, willing, able, and ready to actually serve in that capacity of out-of-hospital birth, if that makes sense. And I see, go ahead, Charlene, I see your hand is raised again. Go ahead.
And I feel, I'm just gonna say, I get like super like overwhelmed, and it's gratitude, right? Because being in this situation with my daughter, and to see the fear in my daughter, she's not afraid to you know, that she's pregnant, or she's not afraid to have birth, but she's afraid to have birth in a hospital because of what happened to her cousin. This is her first child. So to know that financially, I'm unable, right, to provide the funding for my daughter. Because if I had it, if I had the funds, I probably wouldn't even be, honestly, on this Zoom right now, because it wouldn't even affect me, right? But see, when things affect you, your fight is different. So I am literally living this thing right now with my own child, and I am like, every door we knock on is being shut, every door is being cracked open, and it's like, if you don't have the money, it's not going to happen. So being here with you all tonight is so empowering. It's so uplifting. And it's like, whatever I can do moving forward, it's like I'm here because I'm living this thing with my child. And I don't want what my daughter is going through with her firstborn child. I don't want this to ever happen to anybody. This is the saddest thing that this is happening in our country, in our state. It's unbelievable that they're making a pregnant woman who is in prenatal. She doesn't have any medical conditions.
And in other countries where midwives are the primary caretaker of birthing families, where 80% of births happen in the home setting or community setting, you know, you call up the place and say, hey, I'm pregnant, and they're like, okay, great. When you're planning on giving birth at home, right? I mean, and then they send you a kit with all the things you need for your home birth. They promote it, they do everything, and they said, you know, this is the midwife that'll be assigned to you, and blah, blah, blah. And then if the person falls outside that normal sphere, then they're moved on to the hospital setting. But 80% of births are happening at home, and these countries have far better outcomes than our country. And, you know, and I don't know if we're how we can ever change what is happening in the medical model and ACOG and these doctors that have this hierarchy over your choices as a birthing person. That has been ingrained so much in the past 150 years that to break that cycle and to stand up and say, you know what, we're not taking this crap anymore. And we all stand up in unity to say, no, we have the right to give birth where we want, with whom we want. We are smart, educated women or people, and this is what we're choosing. And you have to abide by this. You don't get to tell us, we get to tell you. We're not quite there yet, but there's a whole bunch of us, I bet, on this call that are willing to fight for that. That's for sure.
Yes.
Well, maybe it would be really good if you and Nubia connected afterwards to see if your daughter would qualify for some financial assistance. And the other thing would be to look into who your state legislators are, and call them up and read them the Riot Act.
So I'll interject here because essentially, for those who are newer to this issue, I have been in touch with Charlene and Charlene's daughter essentially at least once a week about this for several months. And I have 10 years of clinical maternal infant health experience and 4 years of being an activist and trying to navigate systems. And like, even together, we are still having trouble figuring out one home birth for one pregnant person. So Charlene, when I mentioned I had a friend who does helps raise money for people who need home birth funds, that's Nubia. So she's who I mentioned to you before.
Yes.
And yes, we've been trying to we sent an email out to folks who've offered to donate before to the Movement to Birth Liberation. So we were essentially waiting to see how much money came back from that before we asked you, Nubia. But we will be knocking on your door soon if we cannot figure this out. And also, like, essentially to the issues that Charlene brought up and the bill that we're here to talk about today, essentially, if this bill were to pass, almost overnight, the number of legal home birth midwives in New York would double. There are really only like 40 home birth midwives in all of New York State. And that's because most of us who are trained in the hospitals stay in the hospitals, whereas the CPM, where you receive the majority of your training outside of the hospital experience, like, that's where you work. So if we legalize CPMs, we automatically just have more CPMs. One issue we run into is people who do sliding scale are all full up, pretty far in advance. And it's just somewhat of a numbers issue of like, if more than X amount of people want to have a home birth who are due in July, those 40 home birth midwives can only take so much. We double the workforce, we immediately have more CPMs or like more qualified home birth attendants. Also, just hearing anecdotally between what our current home birth midwives charge and what the CPMs charge. CPMs tend to be much more affordable. And then lastly, I'll put in the form for the Movement to Birth Liberation, but essentially besides this bill that we are working on, the other legislation we put a lot of support behind is the New York Health Act, which would provide universal guaranteed equitable health care to every New Yorker and would give us one entity to lobby to make home birth fully paid for by insurance instead of a million insurance companies to lobby. So stay tuned to New York Health Act stuff, because these two things go together. If we pass the New York Health Act but don't have enough home birth midwives, won't help. If we have a bunch of home birth midwives but people who want them can't afford them, that won't help. Let's work on them together. And I think we'll pause now and then transition into updates, because I know that we have good ones, and I want for those, to be for folks who've been paying attention. to get the updates and also for the recording, so few people who tune in know what's been going on over the past couple of weeks. So Melissa, can you share with us, since our last teach-in, what's been moving, what's been happening,
Sure.
what
Yeah.
should we know?
So I just want to address Charlie and Andrel. I'm probably murdering the last name. There was a question in the chat: is there a legislative pathway to lowering the cost of malpractice insurance for out-of-hospital midwives? So midwifery regulation does not require licensed midwives to purchase malpractice insurance. And so that's across the board really for any profession. It's usually the hospital that requires their sorry, that requires their providers to carry malpractice insurance. Okay, so that way all the liability doesn't fall on the part of the hospital. So technically you don't have to carry it. Now, as far as legislation to lower the cost of it, I mean, insurance companies, are insurance companies, and they're part of the whole thing that makes things very impossible to obtain. Of course, some, yeah. So I'll just leave that there. I hope that answered that question for you. So since we had our last teach-in, we had been working with Deborah Glick is the chair of the higher ed committee. Kind of ironically, she is a staunch advocate for choice, is pro-choice, is pro. She is a professing lesbian and wants to fight for, and does fight for, the rights for people who identify LGBTQ and all the initials, and I don't even know all the initials, and I apologize. And yet is giving such a block to a birthing person's choice to have a hospital birth. We are the only state in the entire country where midwifery falls under the Department of Education in this state. Other places it's under midwifery, it's under nursing, it's under health. At one time it was under health here in New York, and we're under higher ed. And that's why this is in the higher ed committee on both the Assembly and the Senate. So we've been working with Deborah Glick's office and trying to, get them to say, yep, we're gonna hear this bill and we're gonna vote on this bill in the committee and get it out on the floor. We have over half of the higher ed committee in the Assembly already co-sponsoring this bill, which is really good. We have 14 of the 25 higher ed committee Assembly members on this bill. But everybody says Deborah Glick is she doesn't like to sign professions bills. She doesn't like to create a new profession. So we've also been, obviously our sponsors, Dick Godfried has been a part of every midwifery act in our state. And therefore, it was very difficult to get any other sponsor for this bill except for Dick. And anytime it was even broached with another Assembly person, they're like, Dick handles midwifery. Dick handles midwifery. And they all pass the buck right to him. So that's the card we were dealt. And the bill that we originally drafted, Dick did not go for that bill. We felt it was a more inclusive bill. We felt it had a lot more language that would be more beneficial to CPMs practicing in New York. And Dick did not agree to that. So he came up with the bill that we have currently. And one of the big issues was the the credential of community midwife. The problem is there is no credential in the entire country of a community midwife. There's no credentialing agency that credentials community midwives, and that's not a typical designation given by any state in this country for CPMs. So we received feedback from SED, which is the state education department. Can't say it was anybody real high up in SED, but at least it was feedback regarding some of the language in the bill. Many of the things that they brought up in the bill were things that we had already fought for in the very beginning. I just want to make that really clear. There had been some folks that had come forward and said, you know, you should have this in the bill, you should have that in the bill. And you know what? We totally agreed with that. But we were up against a wall with our sponsor, who was only willing to put this language in the bill. And not that we were settling, but in a way we were, because it was like, if it would allow CPMs to get licensed, then we could go to the next fight. But at least we could get CPMs on the ground. However, SED is also now bringing up like, hey, what's this new credential? And how do we manage that credential? And how do we know what their criteria is for credentialing? So the bottom line is all of the stuff regarding a licensed community midwife and a certified community midwife have now been taken out. Now, keep in mind, this bill is still as it is, but we have proposed a new draft of the bill that addresses many of the issues that we had brought up originally, and also that have been brought to our attention by others in the community. Yeah, I don't know, Katie, if you want more than that, or
I think that was a really helpful explanation.
okay.
I got all of that, and I'll open it up to the audience. Any questions or clarifications about where we stand in the bill process, and kind of like, where we stand in the process of getting this passed? Open the floor for that, or if there are follow-up questions about the amendments.
So we have to, so right now, this bill is still in higher ed. They will not move this bill out of higher ed without the amendments to the bill. So we have that as concrete, like that is their, the line they've drawn in the sand, and they said this bill won't go. So now it's back. We've given our draft. We worked as quickly as we could on it, trying to adopt our original language, and also just using resources from every place that says we should absolutely have CPMs licensed in every state. So resources and pieces of information from all of those different places to put together what we think is the best draft bill we can come up with. And but now it's in Dick's hands, so he has to agree to rewrite this bill, and then we present it back to higher ed as an amended bill. It'll probably get a different number, like with maybe an A or something like that on it. And our time is coming down. Unfortunately, the budget in the state of New York monopolizes a tremendous amount of time, and then leaves this little tiny chunk of time for all the other things in New York State that are going on, thousands and thousands of bills. That's the session. The last day of the session is June 2nd, and that's just around the corner. So we've got to get these amendments done, which we've done our part, and it's in Dick's hands now. We also have Demon Meeks, who is an assemblyman up in Rochester. We're really hoping that He might have some insight for us. And we need every person, every co-sponsor and every constituent to put pressure on their legislators to get this bill out of higher ed. I mean, who knows? Deborah Glick's golf buddy might be Assemblyman, Joe Schmo. Like, come on, Joe, grab a beer with her and put the pressure on. Tell her. I mean, you never know. People rub shoulders and they in social arenas and everything, and they need to move this out of higher ed, but only with this amended language. And I thought there's one other thing I was gonna say about that. So that's where it is. So June 2nd, and then usually on June 2nd, they work until the wee hours of the morning. They probably have gallons of coffee and who knows what else, and they go through these bills, like bill after bill after bill in the bill. We don't believe that there's not a single senator or assembly person that hasn't heard about this bill now. It has been our mission to make sure that every person on our legislative branch of government has heard about this bill through meetings, through emails, through postcards. And so we need to bring attention. We need, if constituents want to meet, like get on a call with us, or even by yourselves or with a group of constituents in your area, get on a call with a legislator and tell them your personal truth. Tell them your story. Charlene, tell them about your daughter. Like, look, my daughter doesn't have a choice here. That system has put up barriers, and she is, I'm assuming, a woman of color who is going to be another statistic in a hospital, and you're not going to stand for it. That you want options for your daughter, and she has the right to have those options. But they have to hear from the constituents. They have to.
Absolutely. So engaging with constituents is one of my fortes. And so if you see that I am repeatedly dropping forms into the chat, some of you who like already got, if you got an email from NYCPM this week and from the Movement to Birth Liberation this week about this teach-in, you're probably set on filling out forms. So we probably got your information. If you did not, please fill those forms out, because the really important thing that we are doing with that information as we collect it is help constituents connect with one another, so that if their legislator is not yet in support of this bill, they can work together to become a voice that cannot be ignored by their legislator, in actually signing on to co-sponsor if they are not yet a co-sponsor, and into using some of their political capital to pressure their coworkers into getting this through and out of committee in a timely manner. If they already are a co-sponsor, that script sounds something like, "Thank you so much for co-sponsoring this legislation. We really need help getting it onto the floor for a vote. Can we count on you to, speak to someone on the higher ed committee? If you are on the higher ed committee, make it one of your priorities this session." But we would love for you to have the information of where you live in New York or elsewhere, so we can plug you into district specific and geographically specific efforts to get your legislators' attention and support. Melissa has been doing an amazing job. Melissa and other members of the board, amazing job at getting in touch with all of the state legislators in New York. So just as a clarification, it's a state level bill, so your federal congressperson cannot do much to help besides like tweet that they think it's a good idea. So we're focusing our energy on our state senators and our state assembly members. There's 150 state assembly members and 63 state senators, so 213 legislators at all in all. And Melissa has, I'm pretty sure, literally reached out to all of them with information about this bill. Now, what can be the most important follow up after the board has initiated contact with a legislator is in district pressure, because sometimes, especially, you know, like, who's this white lady from upstate New York, if it's a legislator of color representing a predominantly community of color in the city, but when they start hearing directly from their constituents that this is a priority, that's when their ears snap up. So between last teach-in and this teach-in, we've gotten one new Senate co-sponsor on the bill, and that was Senator Sepulveda, who is someone that Melissa worked hard with to get in touch with that office and get them information, and also Grace Roman, who is on this call and is a CPM student and a constituent of Senator Sepulveda, called him several times to say, hi, I'm your constituent. I know you've gotten information on this bill and we need your support. And also, and maybe more importantly, tweeted at Senator Sepulveda and responded to some of his tweets that said, like, you know, happy day to everyone. And Grace was like, be a happier day if we if we had your support on this bill. And
Well,
some
and
other strategic. Grace, you're welcome to chime in off camera and on mic, but some other very clever, you know, not dragging him on Twitter, but making it clear that we would love his support and that the absence of his support is being noticed by his constituents. And what do we see? Him signed on to the bill a couple of, you know, within the week. And so Melissa's reached out to a lot of legislators from the board's end, and I think hearing from constituents in district, like, we know you've probably gotten some information. It's super important to me as the constituent. That's often is what going to be the, you know, the tipping point for a legislator of like, you know, I won't vote no for this bill if it comes to the floor versus I'm going to work hard to make sure this bill actually gets to the floor for a vote because I know that it's important to the people who vote for me. But both Monique Wiggins and Melissa have their hands raised. If Monique, did you still want to say something?
Sorry, I keep forgetting to unmute. Oh my God, oh yeah. I want to know, was Leeward Comedy one of the people that you contacted, Melissa?
Yeah.
Is he? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, that's what I want to know.
I have this giant thing of notes that's like, I think I dream about senators and assembly people. So let me just tell you that, okay, so Comrie, I have reached out to them 4 times with voicemails and they have never returned a phone call.
Let me tell you, they had a what are those little I don't want to say little because that's the meaning, a Zoom thing or whatever about this issue. And I don't think I was sarcastic. I might have been, because I said under it would be nice if he signed on to the bill, because as of that point, it was still 7 people and he wasn't one of the 7 people, you know, and no response. But he had talking about support. We must get this done from maternal. I think it's just because it was Maternal Health Week and he just wanted to do a something that was politically correct, I guess, because I see no reason for him to be that go for that, but wouldn't sign on for this bill.
Right.
That's what I wanted to say.
So I want to be sensitive to folks who thought we didn't say when this teach-in would end because that's a clever trick I've learned as an organizer. Uh, but for people who scheduled an hour in, are there any super important points that we want to let to make sure get into the hour version of this teach-in? And then I think we're happy to stay on till 8:30, continuing to answer questions. Um,
Charlene has her hand up, I
Great.
think.
Yeah, go ahead, Charlene.
Well, I find this very interesting. Like I said, it's always a teachable moment for me, and I'm learning. And it's interesting to note that Leeward Comedy has not been aggressive when it's concerning this bill. So now I have to put now I have to utilize my resources that I have.
Absolutely.
And I'm also a beautiful woman of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And also, one of my sorors is his administrative assistant. So, anywho, I just wanted to say that. So, I'm going to do that, but I need some help with the wording.
Yes. So Charlene and Monique, for sure at our next Nieces Purple Heart Foundation meeting, let's talk about how we can rep Queens well and really get all Queens people on board. We've talked about Assembly Member Glick is the chair for the Higher Ed Committee in the Assembly. It is Senator Stavitsky who represents areas of Queens, who is the chair of the Senate Higher Ed Committee and is also strategic to this conversation. Now I'll remind, as we've said before, like imagine if this, so there is at our state legislators' offices tend to be between 2 to maybe 6 office staff workers that they have to help them with everything that they do, from the calls they get, scheduling, events they're going to, legislative issues. That's all the help they have is 2 to 6 office work, people on their office staff. And so I think typically when initiating a relationship, or if you don't previously have a relationship with a senator's office, go in assuming the most generous things possible, and that with a small staff, they may not have time to fully vet the information that every organization sends them about their bills. And the essentially the kind of representative that I want is one that spends more time listening to constituent concerns than those that are coming from outside of the district. And so it could very well, and also there's significant racial disparities in how office funding are distributed throughout the state. So on the whole, Black legislators have much less funding than white legislators do for their offices. So that's another thing we need to we'll be working on. That's why it's a movement, not a moment, because that's one more thing to work on. So I think particularly with Comroy, I would go in assuming, like, we know you've received information about this bill. Don't know if you've had time to review it yet, but I'm calling as a constituent to make it clear that it's very important to me that this is prioritized. And that's kind of where I talked before about, like, kind of the inside outside strategy, having the board be in touch as well as constituents. That's why it's so important, is because constituents may not have all of the answers to, like, the nitty gritty legislative questions that a legislator may have in wanting to come onto the bill. But constituents have the actual power to get their person's attention. Particularly, we know that midwifery is not and should not be a niche issue, but despite us knowing that has not saturated our popular culture. And so we probably will need to do, both in district work or a significant amount of in district work to get this on folks' radar and for them to understand it as the reproductive justice issue that it is, as the maternal health improving law that it is. So that's why I say, like, we'll take Queens, because you guys have, like, a lot of Queens reps have already reached out to Nieces Purple Heart to say, like, what can we do? And so this is the time for us to come back to them and be like, here are the laws we want passed this year. If you were serious earlier, do it.
I see Missy and Charlene have their hands raised. Again, go ahead, Missy, and then Charlene.
So, someone had asked a question in the chat about how many people from the Senate. I've got my trusty dusty little board here, and because this is my OCD stuff going on. But so far we have 12, and 8 of them are co-sponsors, and then we have solid support from others. So like Mike Martucci, I think, which is down your area, Patricia Ritchie, Pamela Helming. They are like, we support this bill. When it comes across the table on our desk, we're saying yes to it. One of them even gave us a letter saying they support the legislation. So we're at 12. For the assembly, it's 38. And by the way, you mentioned, and this is why I had my hand up, Katie, since our last teach-in, also Denman Meeks from Rochester is co-sponsoring the bill on the assembly side. So, and we've got a lot of meetings coming up with legislators as well. We would love to have people be a part of it. We've had a couple new people that have joined in, and their input is very valued. And yeah.
Great. So I guess with all of that information, are there questions from constituents here about how best to engage with their legislators? Do I can do everything from kind of just showing you how to look up your legislator and if they're on this bill, and to get to talking more deeply in the next 10-15 minutes that we have. But would love for us to leave with everyone knowing, having a feeling of they have a sense of what they can be doing in between now and June, to be pushing this effort along. So please, if you have specific or like any questions.
Or do you have, does anybody have feedback on the bill or questions regarding the bill that aren't clear to them? We would love to hear from you. Like, and even if it's a negative thing, it's okay to talk about that. Because we want to hear that. We don't want someone to be like, oh, they wrote in that bill and then you never speak about it. So then you just harbor that feeling of like not knowing why it was written a particular way. So anything like that? Okay, good. No. Yeah, go ahead, Monique.
Monique has her hand. Yeah. Monique W.
Yeah, Monique W. Oh, that's right. We're doing MW.
Yeah, I haven't read the whole bill. I've read like the summary of it. From what I read, I like it. But from what I read, I can tell there's going to be issues with people that don't like immigrants. And my thing is, it's cost effective to do it like this, because you can't have somebody die and just not, or be sick and not care for them. Because if I'm not correct me please if I'm wrong, it's not just the New York Health Act is not just for midwives and such and birthing people. It's for everybody. Am I correct in my assumption?
You are correct that the New York Health Act is for everybody, but you're getting a little confused between the New York Health Act is the insurance for everybody bill, and the bill we're talking about today is specifically about legalizing CPMs in New York.
Okay.
So essentially it will be pro-immigrant because it'll be easier for immigrants to get appropriate and culturally congruent care, and we don't have to mention that to anybody who's like openly xenophobic.
So this what we're talking about now is it's not S7078.
This
That
is
is-
S7078, but
It
that is the CPM legalization bill.
Okay, so the other one, what is that? A something or other?
That's I don't
insurance?
remember the title because it changes year to year, but that's the New York Health Act. And the thing that's super unusual about you, Monique Wiggins, is that you are actually reading the text of the bill, and most people do not. And so again, like, I would just tailor the the benefits of the bill to the audience that I'm speaking with, and yeah.
Everything that is in the New York Health Act, that wasn't anything that NYCPM had anything to do with, or, like drafting that language or anything like that. So that was, that was all work that, Katie and MBL and the sponsors on that particular bill had to deal with. And ours is strictly on what was called the Community Midwifery Bill, which I think is going to end up changing its name. So that's strictly about CPMs becoming licensed.
Okay, thank you.
So anyone interrupt me if there's questions, but I'm just gonna speed do a 10-minute thing that I've gotten a lot of feedback is helpful. And that is essentially just to show you how to look up who your legislators are and how to find out whether or not they are currently in support of this bill. So the easiest way to find out who your New York State Senator and State Assembly person are is by typing into Google, who is my New York State Senator? And one of the first, pretty much all of the links that come up in the first page will take you to a site that allows you to put in your address and find out who your state legislators are. So I particularly enjoy Open States if you live in Long Island or upstate New York. They show you everyone who represents you up there. And then for folks who live in the 5 boroughs of New York City, mygovnyc.org will show you not only your state representatives, but also your city representatives. So then once we find out, so I'll use an address close by to my house. And now we see that, so city rep isn't going to help that much right now. Federal rep isn't going to help that much right now. Who I want are my state reps. My state assembly member is Assemblymember Zinnerman, and my state senator is Jabari Brisport. So we're just double checking that we are looking at our state reps and not our federal or very local representatives. And then the next thing you do is, okay, well, now I know who my representatives are. Do they actually support this bill? You can type in New York Community Midwifery Bill, and for sure, if and when the name changes of this bill or the numbers change, we will let you know immediately. It'll be all over our social media so that you have the accurate one to look up. But again, you type in more or less the right words, and usually one of the first results is going to be what you're looking for. So I know this is what I'm looking for because it's at the nysenate.gov, so it's like the government's official website. I look here. I make sure it's the right title of the bill and that it is the correct legislative session 2021 to 2022. Monique, you look that up on your own. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it at our next Nieces Purple Heart meeting. I'm showing you how to do things, so you go do them.
Yes. Hello, okay. I got an update.
Oh yeah.
Samra Brook signed on as co-sponsor.
Woo! Rochester for the win! All right.
Woo!
So, yes. So the Senate bill is S7078. And then to find the assembly version of the bill, if you scroll down on the bill page, it links to it right there. See the assembly version of this bill, A7898. And there we go. I'm looking. It has the right legislative session, right title, sponsored by Gottfried, right bill. And so, how I see whether or not my legislator is openly supporting this bill is to click down and see who. So, if you're a constituent of Gottfried, he definitely supports it because he's the sponsor. And then, if you are a constituent of any of these other co-sponsors, essentially co-sponsoring is a way to vote yes in advance on a bill. It's a way to publicly show that you support this, that when it comes to the floor, you will vote yes on it, and that it is important to you and your constituents as a piece of legislation to be passed. So the more co-sponsors on a bill, typically the easier it is to get passed, because the more people who know about it and other legislators look and say, oh shoot, a bunch of Democrats and socialists and Republicans signed on to this bill. I guess there's no reason why I shouldn't either. And they are more likely to support it because peer pressure, or, reinforcing each other. So here I am looking at the assembly version of the bill, and I just see who are the co-sponsors, and I just go down slowly because it is a new bill and they are not alphabetized. So I want to make sure that I see my assembly person if they are here, and they are. Woohoo! Yes, Assembly Member Zinnerman is on this bill. I did my calls. I sent my texts using the text tool that NYCPM had sent out, and got an email from her shortly thereafter saying she would sign on to the bill. And here she is. And then we go to the Senate version of the bill, and we see, oh, beautiful. Its primary sponsor is Senator Salazar. And then this is I refreshed this bill honestly 3 hours ago, and Samra Bork was not on here. So Senator Brook, sorry, I have a hard time with her name because I was reading it for a long time before I knew how it was pronounced. Senator Brook is on board. That's amazing. Senator Jackson, Kennedy, May, Parker, Sepulveda, Skoufis, and Weck. If you have a Republican legislator mentioning that there's already a Republican co-sponsoring this bill, is probably, I would add that to your script to let them know that we're not just lying, that it should be bipartisan. It's actually bipartisan. It's actually tripartisan because, again, the socialists are on the bill. And so really showing that this is a regulatory issue. It doesn't cost the state money. There's only upsides. There really aren't downsides. And yes, so I wanted to show you those two skills of kind of how to find out who your rep is and whether or not they support a bill you want them to support, because that's important to the initial stages of calling as a constituent for this effort. And then certainly our vision as the Movement to Birth Liberation and our co-organizing partners is that people are getting birthed in every district of New York. And so if we can unite around issues that improve the lives of birthing people, there's nothing that can stop us. And so we hope to build those relationships with legislators in every district, so that they support the issues that we support. And if they really won't, if they're so unreasonable that they won't, we have things in our back pocket to hand to their opponents in upcoming elections to say, there was a super reasonable bill that they wouldn't even sign on to. Use it against them in their campaign. Let's get a better person in here to represent for us. All right. It is 8:26, and that was pretty much the last thing I wanted to go over for folks who had missed the first teach-in, because I think it's just a good skill to have to know how to look up if the person representing you is doing a good job or in actually representing your values. And quickly knowing how to search a bill and seeing if they're on it gives you a lot of feedback as to the kind of person who's representing you and whether or not you want them to continue representing you. Elections are this November, and so yeah, this could be like your trial point as to whether who you want to support in the coming elections. Any other things I forgot to mention that are important that folks want to share before we all say goodbye for the night?
Just want to say after what you said about this is a tripartisan but bipartisan bill, and yet this is a majority partisan bill for sponsorship. We do not have a lot of Republicans on this bill, and even though they're in the minority, the Republicans do represent many districts that have people who choose community birth. So if you happen to be in a district, if I don't know where the majority of people are from here, but if it's a New York City area, obviously it's predominantly Democratic, but in upstate and Western New York, it's more predominantly Republican, but you guys beat us out for legislators. So
yeah, us city folks can do our upstate friends a solid by getting folks who may be more low-hanging fruit onto this bill. And if you do live in a Republican district, I think we should really hold their feet to the fire of like, if you aren't an openly white supremacist organization and actually stand for like some principles, isn't one of them pro-family? Shouldn't that mean making sure that people have the choice to birth options that they want? Aren't you for small government and getting government regulations out of people's personal life decisions? Like, there are lots of arguments we can be. I thank God that I'm represented by a socialist and a Democrat, and that I do not have to figure out how to negotiate by personally being represented by a Republican in this day and age. But for those of you who do, I think there are lots of strong arguments we can make. And if really they all fall on deaf ears and they will not publicly support this bill by signing on as co-sponsors, then that should be hopefully that will help you become motivated to support whoever their opponent is in the coming election. I was just talking to somebody in Martucci's district. He won by like 1,300 votes last year as a Republican, and the Jen Metzger, the female senator he beat out, would have been totally on board with us and like be fighting for us if as opposed to like, oh, I won't vote no if it comes to the floor. So so that's what there is to say about that. Is like, maybe we can keep moving our Republicans into reasonableness, and if they cannot be moved into reasonableness, let's get them removed from office, because as a state we deserve to be represented by people who will make good decisions based off the facts and not based off of like who's in power and who they want to make nice with, or whatever other issues may be going on behind the scenes. All right. Well, it was so lovely to speak with you all tonight. We will be in touch in the coming weeks with more specific calls to actions and ways that you can support. Please, 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 particularly if you live in the city, we probably have a lot of other people in the Movement to Birth Liberation database who haven't been able to make it out to a teach-in. And so we'd love it if you wanted to kind of help lead efforts in your district. To engage with your senator. You are probably now one of the most knowledgeable people in your district about this issue, having attended this teach-in. So please reach out and let us know the ways that you can help. I think the board is working kind of beyond their capacity at this time, and any extra volunteer effort would be amazing at this time. I put in the chat for Nisi's Purple Heart Foundation. Again, if folks want to learn more and get involved with them as one of our co-sponsors, there's a form to fill out there. One of our other co-sponsors is the Save a Rose Foundation. I got my purple rose on for Amber Rose. And they also have an event coming up in the Bronx. So if you're a city located, look them up on Instagram, and I will hopefully get to meet you in person shortly at our local reproductive justice gathering and memorial event for Amber Rose. So thank you guys all so much, and I will end the recording and say goodbye tonight. Have a great one, and see you all hopefully soon.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
Good night.
Yeah, night.